I don't know about you, but I like to hear what people try to do to inspire others. I like to listen in on what people are trying to encourage others to do. One of the things that I really enjoy listening to is coaches that try to get their teams fired up right before a game. What do they say? What are they trying to convey to their team? And sometimes you wonder, as you listen to the coach speak, you wonder what those words are meaning because you don't understand. You from the outside, you're trying to understand what the coach is trying to draw out of the players that are being addressed. I always wonder what a commander says to his troops right before he sends them into harm's way. What does he draw upon in their minds as they prepare to go out, perhaps for the last time? What would make people do that? What are the last thoughts that go through their mind? Perhaps those thoughts are some of the thoughts that are the first thoughts in our minds. Why we would even engage in some particular activity, join some particular group, go on some particular mission, try to achieve some particular goal. I would like you to think about this passage of Scripture perhaps as the words that you remind yourself of as you undertake some particular work of service. Perhaps these are the words you can use to inspire yourself. We need to be reminded constantly as to what we are doing and why we are doing it. We need to be mentally prepared. We need to be strengthened by good thoughts. Now, most of what God gives us are those kinds of thoughts, things we need to be concerned about. And there are many words in this book. But I think in this passage that we're going to look at today, gives us an insight into how God wants us to live every day. When we rise up in the morning, as we see the day ahead of us, as we contemplate all the people we're going to interact with and all the things we're going to do, what should we remind ourselves of? I believe it's this passage right here. 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 14 says, "Do everything in love." Now, when we have these absolute statements like this, these are quite scary statements. They challenge us by raising the bar so high where God expects us to be like He is, in the realm of perfection. Can you imagine doing everything that you do in love? Now, all we have to do is spend a few moments and think back to the last few things we did. Were they done in love? I want us to consider breaking down this passage into the thoughts that make it up. So if you can see by the slide, first there's do, and then everything, and in love. So let's look at the first one, do. Why do? Well, because Christians are doers. We're not watchers. We're not non-participants. We don't see other people do things. That's not what God intended for us. There's a phrase I like to remember, and it's a tough one to live by. And if you've been challenged in any way physically, you know what it means physically. If you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. A couple of months ago, I started getting arthritis in my hand. Okay, I turned 50 in November, so that's pretty young to start getting arthritis. I got it in this finger, and I can feel it in this finger more so, but pretty much it's in both hands. And I started reading up about it. I started thinking, well, maybe there's a cure. Well, don't get excited. There's no cure. I got excited. I thought there might be a cure, and he had all these remedies, and they don't work. I've tried all of them. But there was one thing it said. It said you have to constantly use whatever part you have that has arthritis in it. Otherwise, it's going to become even worse. You have to constantly be doing something. The fact of the matter is, physically, we were actually made to move. God made this body that you have to move. I think one of the toughest things to notice in people that cannot move, one of the hardest things to accept, is when you look at somebody's body that has just been doing nothing, you notice the atrophy in the muscles. You notice when somebody was once whole and full, their muscles were active, they were larger, you notice the muscles slowly shrinking. And you notice them wasting away. It's probably the worst thing that could ever happen to you, physically. Now I believe spiritually it applies. I think the worst thing we can be as Christians is to have spiritual atrophy. To see somebody who should be moving, who should be active, who should be doing things, and nothing's being done. Now I wonder, if the phrase is true physically, if you're not using it, you lose it. What does it mean spiritually? What are we going to lose? It's a thought I would not like to consider. I encourage you to think about what it means to do. Notice what John writes in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 18. He says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth." It's so easy for us to say that we love someone, isn't it? It's so much more difficult to be motivated to do something about it. If you love someone, what are you going to do about it? Because speaking about it is not going to prove the point. It's not going to have the impact that you desire. The fact of the matter is, love requires that you do something about it. Love requires action. So here, we see Paul saying that we must be doers. We must be active. Now sometimes we become too active, we become overactive. And if you work too hard, there's a consequence to that too. But let it not be said that a Christian has spiritual atrophy. You should be described by your energy and your effort. And then we think, well, where am I going to find that energy or effort? I believe it's not just from us. God is the one who provides us with the energy and the effort that we need. We can only do so much. But if we think about what God has done for us already, isn't it inspirational? Doesn't it make you want to move? Doesn't just thinking about what God has done for you just move you inside? I think we need to tap into that. We need to realize what God has already done for us and motivate us to think about what we can do for others. So I think when we rise up tomorrow morning, the first word that should come out of our mouths is do. We are going to think about what we need to do. Not what we're going to stand around and watch others do, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do starting in the morning? Next, you notice the word everything. Now, I don't think everything here implies everything, because you can do a lot of really evil things, couldn't you? Those don't go along with the word love, so you couldn't do those. And in the context of this phrase, this motto, Paul is saying that it must be done in context. In context, love requires that we do things that are good, that are right. So everything implies everything that is good. Now, of course, that requires us to know what is good. So there must be some study. Then there must be some thought put into what we are about to engage in. Therefore, our lives must be about everything that is good. Now, too many times we spend too much of our time thinking about bad things. If we put into ourselves all of these good things, then good things are going to come out. If we put into ourselves all these bad things, then bad things are going to come out. We're not going to be able to fulfill this particular command. When we wake up in the morning and we think about what we're about to do we know that it is good? Do we know that it's something that is right? Do we know that it's something that's going to benefit somebody else? Notice what Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. He says, let us not become weary in doing good. Don't get worn down that you cannot do good. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Now, I think Paul here sets it in context. All those things that we do, all the effort that we put out, in all the good things that we are thinking about, and all the good things that we are doing, it must begin here. We probably have sayings, don't we, about the family? Love begins at home. You can put any single phrase you want right there. It all begins in the home. As parents, we're either going to be doing everything that is good and showing our children that we're doing everything that's good, or we're not. Paul here says we can't give up doing what is good. There are many things today that we can get worn down about. There are many things about our lives, about our community, about our culture that are completely opposed to God. And you can feel like at times that you are butting your head up against a wall. Can you give up? Paul is saying, no, you cannot give up. You do what needs to be done because it is right. Not just because you need to do it, but because it is right. Too many times today I see so many people just give up, walk away from doing really good things because they see no progress. They see no improvement. You know, at the very least, it's good for you. Doing the right thing, at the very least, is good for you. That's what he's saying here. If you do the right thing at the proper time, you're going to be rewarded for it. Everything. Everything. The bar is very high. This is an ideal. And many times people are afraid of ideals. The truth today is most people are afraid of idealists. Well, as Christians, we need to be idealists. Personally, we need to strive for the ideal. God is the ideal. He is the ultimate. And if we want to be like Him, then when we do, we need to do everything that is right. Because that's what God does. God does no wrong. And therefore we can do no wrong. And then finally it says, in love. In love means that it benefits those around us. So many times we do many good things. We do many right things. But we see them only benefiting ourselves. They're only done for personal reasons. Love requires that they are done for other reasons. Sometimes we've got to do things we don't even want to do. That's what love is. Love is doing something that you don't even want to do. Something that you don't even like to do. Perhaps something that you've never done before. Something that perhaps you'll never complete. Something perhaps that you'll never really understand. But we do it anyway, because that's what love requires. Even the word itself is described as sacrificing yourself to improve somebody else's life. That's what that definition of love is. It's a sacrificial love. It's not a conditional love. It's an unconditional love. It means whatever excuse we try to come up with, it doesn't count. Whatever kind of obstacle we think may prevent us from doing things, we don't see them. Whatever kind of problem we may have in the process, we must overcome. Love requires that we do good for others. Too many times it's about self-love and self-love only. If we really love ourselves, we will also love others. If we really love others, as John will say, we love God. Notice what Paul writes in Romans 13 here. He says, love does no harm to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Love means you're going to make the ultimate sacrifice. If you understand what love is, you're going to make the ultimate sacrifice for someone who doesn't even deserve it. The idea of love in and of itself is a bar set very high. If we think of Jesus, what Jesus did on the cross, what Jesus did on the cross means that He did what He did for more people that would reject Him than those that would accept Him. Jesus understood real love. As Christians, we need to spend the rest of our lives trying to understand that. And if that means we're going to do something for someone who doesn't love us, who doesn't appreciate what we're doing, in fact doesn't want us to do that for him, we still need to do that. If we can't love, how can we expect love? And then in return, how can we expect love from God? I think one of the hardest things for us to accept is the fact that God has instructed us to do things for Him. And too many times Christians defer the work that we should be about to God. There's a lot of work that goes into pretty much everything, doesn't there? Pretty much everything takes a lot of effort. And it doesn't take very much to just throw it all away. I remember when I was a kid, my brother and I would always make all kinds of buildings and all kinds of structures to see how high we could get them. You know, we'd have blocks or bricks or whatever we were using. And of course, one of us would come up with a sinister idea. As soon as we get close to the top and maybe we're going to beat the other one, oops, there'd be an accident and the whole thing would fall down. Now that's the way the world works, doesn't it? But you know what love says? You know, I'm going to build that again. And the world will come along and knock it down again. And you know what love says? I will build it again. We will keep doing that until the world gets what it is we are trying to do. I would encourage you to think about, as a church, what are we going to do? How are we going to see the work ahead of us? How are we going to look at the community around us? And are we going to be able to repeat these words? That we will do everything in love. There is nothing good that we will not do to try to show people God's love. I want you to think about this week about the fact that we are supposed to be doers of all things good to benefit those around us. It seems like an insurmountable task, an impossible task. Well, let's get busy. There are a lot of things to do. There are a lot of good things that we can do. It's time for us to stop just talking about what it means to do the right thing and to start doing it. I encourage you to think about that this week. Each of us in here can rise every day to say these words, that we will do everything in love.